Joining me today is the comic book writer of titles like An Army of Hope, Requiem for a Robot, and his most recent venture, the successfully crowdfunded ClosetWorld. He is also a retired United States Air Force colonel, but maybe more impressively, he also wrote an issue of Wolverine where he begrudgingly babysits a little girl. It is my pleasure to welcome Matt Yocum onto the Oblivion Bar Podcast.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. I listen to you guys all the time, and I'm just so excited to get a chance to talk to you.
Well, that means so much. We were talking a little bit before the recording how that's never going to not surprise me. You know, when people say that they listen to the Oblivion Bar, like we had Patrick Horvath on the show recently and he says he listens. And I'm like, what? That's not a thing. We don't listen. And he's like, yeah, I'm like, you know what? That's amazing. I appreciate it. Thank you. Also, Matt, as well.
Absolutely. No, yeah. I'm looking forward to it.
Now, am I?
Oh, go ahead. Real quick, I have to say, you know, that it's unfortunate that Aaron can't be here as a fellow retired veteran.
Yep.
So let me say, since he's not here, congratulations to him and his career. Anybody who's put the time in and then retired, you know, obviously, I'm so grateful for the time he put in, and wish I could, you know, meet him virtually here as well. But just glad to be here with you.
Well, I think at some point, depending on how well this goes, and I'm anticipating that it will go well, we'd love to have you back on at some point. And obviously Aaron will be here the next time, because I agree. It would be great to get you guys together because, you know, I put my 4 years in, you know, and everybody who joins the military in some facet, if you put your name on the dotted line, whether you're reserves or you did 25 years and you had 6, you know, overseas tours and all the things, I think regardless of all that, if you put your name on the dotted line, you deserve a ton of credit. And of course, that's coming from someone who only did 4 years and never deployed. But, you know, someone who's probably seen a lot more than I have, I think you maybe would probably agree.
100%. The vast majority of the population does not put on the uniform. So for anybody, well, it doesn't matter how long they did it. It's, you know, kudos for anybody who signs up and does their time to serve, you know, the country and give back. So,
well, it's funny. We sort of perfectly transitioned into my first point in our conversation together. So, and actually real quick, before we get into the conversation,
yes,
Yocum, am I saying that correctly?
That's right.
Perfect.
Exactly.
You know, if Aaron was here, and again, we've already said, you've listened to the show, so you know this, I cannot pronounce words. It's like, it's this thing where, you know, like when you see a word, like in a book or whatever, you say it in your head, and then when you try to say it with words, it just comes out differently.
It doesn't come out. Yeah, that's right.
That's me all the time. I can't pronounce things, but anyway.
That's a great trait for a, you know, podcaster. Yeah,
right. Exactly. It is like my biggest Achilles heel is that I can't pronounce things. I go to Aaron and he's like, dude, it's this, you know, and I'm
right.
Like, okay, whatever. So anyway, we're talking about the military here, and I want to just sort of pick your brain. I want to get sort of the listener familiar with you and your career, not only as a comic book writer, but also your time in the military. So sort of broadly, let's talk about that. Let's talk about, you know, what is your history? What got you into the military? Eventually you were in the Air Force, eventually retired as a colonel. Again, congratulations. I haven't said that yet.
Thank you.
Incredible. But also, can you give us sort of a lowdown on, you know, what got you into the military? And then also what came first? Was it comic books, nerd culture? I know you love Star Wars as well. Did that come before the military, or did that come while you were in the military?
Yeah, I'll start with that last part first. Nerd culture started for me prior to the military. So my love of science fiction, my love especially of comics, you know, and I know exactly which issue it was, Iron Man number 165, where he's, you know, coming out of a castle with his armors melting around him and his fists raised. Denny O'Neil wrote it, and you know it ends on a cliffhanger. But then the next month, I was able to get the next issue and see how that resolved, and that was it. My kind of the OCD completist in me just loved to like get every, you know, issue from that point on. And then it was pre-internet. This was the hunt was on to get every issue prior. So a couple more later, 165. Yep.
165 was the issue. I'm sorry. I thought you said 162. I apologize.
Oh no. Yeah. 165. But that was it. The hunt was on to get everything. That meant flea markets and, you know, garage sales. That's it. He's coming out with his armor melted. Yep. I love, to me, that cover is iconic because it just shows like his strength, and despite everything, you know, falling down around him.
Sure.
So that, you know, that and story. I've had a love of story and storytelling and good stories. And then, of course, the big action and the big stories that are told in comics. So it was also around the era of the direct market. And I grew up in a small town in Kentucky, in northern Kentucky, a similar area where the artist David Mack is from. We went to the same shop growing up, and we had a shop in our small town. So prior to the military, I just got infected with it. I was at a young age when I was able to see Star Wars, the first one live. Of course, that informed so many, of our youth, Battlestar Galactica and so on. That precedes. In parallel to that, I was fairly driven at a fairly early age. And so I was enamored with the space program, and I had a dream to be an astronaut. So I decided I want to go to the Air Force Academy. I want to graduate from there so I can become a fighter pilot, and then I want to be a test pilot, and then I want to be an astronaut. And so I literally set my whole, focus of school from that point on was to make that happen. And then when I was at the Air Force Academy, it kind of really was my last year, is when I realized the dream to fly was not really as strong as I thought it had been. And I had been writing short stories, again, prior to coming in the military, before going to the academy. I had been writing short stories and sending science fiction short stories to magazines, Isaac Asimov's science fiction magazine and Amazing Stories, and going to the libraries to read submission guidelines. Since that, I saw myself, honestly, as a storyteller first, above everything. And it was my senior year before I graduated. So the last second, I pivoted and decided, you know what, I'm not going to go to pilot training. This isn't for me. And then I just used the Air Force for the next 30 years to feed me with every unique experience I could get. I would raise my hand for it. So,
yeah. And, it's interesting is that it's funny to hear you say that, how you had sort of one goal and then you got into the military and sort of completely flipped that on its head. And I think that's a lot of young people, right? I mean, you joined when you were really young. So was it 17 when you joined
17.
the Air Force? Yeah. I was 18. When I met Aaron, we actually met while we were in the Army together. He was in his mid to late 20s, and I was, fresh out of high school. So, and I think you could agree with this. Many folks who have been in the military will attest to this as well, is that the military, because, Aaron and I are Army, is what you get out, like you get out of it what you put into it, right? Like whatever you want in the military, if you want to travel, if you want to get a free education, if you want to get out of your shell, get out of home, like all the things, you can do that while in the military. So obviously you are sort of at the beck and call of the government in a way,
right.
But none of this is free. Of course, you have to do things for that, but it is, I think, extremely valuable for a young person to leave home, but also get a little structure in the military.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I did not set, after I graduated, I know I owed 5 years. And then I was fortunate, I was able to go straight to graduate school. So I owed 3 years, not concurrently, but consecutively. So because I went straight to 3 weeks after I graduated, I was back in school at grad school. And I knew, okay, I know I owe 8 years instead of the standard 5 years at the end of graduation. But when I approached that 8 years, I had no designs on anything. Like I didn't decide, I've got to get to 10 or I've got to get to 20 and then retire at 20 or do 30 or whatever. I literally was, I'm going to keep looking for unique opportunities. If they give them to me, I'm going to stay in. And I kept getting assignment after assignment that I wanted. And as long as I did that, I'm like, there's just no sense getting out. I like what I do. I'm having a ton of fun. It's a lot of work, but I'm having a ton of fun. And I saw myself as a writer first. And so because I kept raising my hand for so many unique assignments, I had one of the most eclectic careers that a lot of military people, they'll tell you. It was so non-standard. And then second, because of that, I'm flooded with just personal experiences and travels and people and getting a chance to live almost a decade out of the country to get to know different cultures and learn their languages. So, it's exactly what you said. You get what you put into it. For some people, I recognize, my brother was an example of this. He did 5 years in the Air Force. There were aspects of it that did not suit his personality. So he did his time and he got out. And then in the civilian world is really where he thrived. It gave him some good things, but I also knew for him, this just doesn't suit him. And I was glad when he got out when he did and really found his footing, outside. For me, it did because it just kept giving me what I wanted.
Sure. Yeah. You've almost perfectly described Aaron and I. Like he did his 20 years and
Yeah.
I want to go, and I did my 4 years, of course, like we talked about, but I want to go back on what you said there a moment ago. You were talking about sort of, you put in your time, and then you get to a certain point, you have to decide whether you get out or you stay in. And I've always heard that, and I only did 4.5 years. So they always tell you, if you do any more than 4.5, you might as well just stay in, right? Like, because the next term you're getting to like around 8 or 9 years in, and you're already halfway there. You might as well just stay in for the other half and get that.
That's right.
I mean, Aaron is, sorry, everybody, I'm putting Aaron's business out for everybody listening right now, but Aaron is like not even 40 yet, and he has a full pension. Okay.
That's right.
That is incredible stuff. And then, know, and that you don't have many industries in the world where that is even possible. So I totally get why you did that. And again, gosh, I keep saying this, but I really wish Aaron was here, because he did the same thing. He was public affairs in the Army, where there's like 17 people in the Army that do that.
Yeah, that's
like,
right.
I see a very similar path with you in the Air Force as well.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I recognize I'm in a very, very unique position, having done a full 30 years, retiring at the rank that I got to, which was it's a long story. I should not have gotten to the rank that I got to, because I was making personal decisions over professional, but because I would just put my head down and work. And ultimately it caught up, and people kind of took care of me. It didn't happen right away when it was, when you would hit certain gates for promotion. I didn't hit those, but then other people would see I just never phoned in the job. I never quit. I just kept working. I mean, to me, you serve. It's not even serve. You just work with excellence in everything at every time. It's not an on-off switch. You just are. So, and that includes writing, anything. Like, I'm always trying to get better as a writer, as a person, as a father, as a whatever. Even before I had kids, like, I would just try to learn, like, what's working with, this family and their kids, and not working with this. And so people then took care of me. But going back to where I started with this, I recognize that retiring with the years that I did at the rank that I did, I'm in a privileged position of a retirement and a level of, what do you call it? Like medical and other services for me and especially for my family. That's allowing me to make decisions now that I would not have been able to make. There'd be a lot of other choices I'd have to make. And so that's what's allowing me now on the other side of retirement to do a whole host of very different things and kind of pick and choose, which ones, A, do I want to pursue? And then B, as I cast different seeds and see which ones sprout on different, post Air Force jobs, I can cast the seeds that I want, and then whichever one sprout, I can decide, yep, I'm going to pursue that one a little bit more, or no, I'm actually not going to pursue this one. So
they have a saying, and I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, but in the military, they say, stay water. You got to stay flexible. You got to adjust. You got to be able to zig when someone zags, that kind of thing. And I'm a firm believer, inside the military or not. And it's a lot of military talk, everybody. We will get to comments here in just a moment. But I'm a firm believer that the people who are the most successful in our civilized world, is flexibility and inquisitiveness. Right. If you were curious, and headstrong, which you had mentioned as well, I think is very important as well in this world. You have to be able to want something and go after it. But I also think you need to stay curious. You need to stay, and again, you got to stay flexible. If you fail, which I'm sure you failed throughout your life, I know I have, you got to be able to be like, okay, well, let's move on to the next thing. You can't just stay stagnant, right?
Yeah.
And I have one more military question before we move on.
Sure.
And it sort of ties in this whole thing is, what is the correlation with, nerd culture and the military? Because I know for Aaron and I, part of the reason why we became best friends almost immediately, because he was my superior. I got in as an E3. He was an E5 at the time when we first met. And part of the reason why we instantly connected was because of like nerd culture, our love of Tron, of Daft Punk, of comic books, of, schlocky 80s action, all these things that we have now transitioned into the Oblivion Bar. We wear it on our sleeves, basically. Started in the military. Pokemon, another good example of this. Like, we would travel around with each other throughout Georgia. We were stationed in Fort Stewart in Savannah, Georgia. We would travel to these different trading card tournaments and have a weekend of it, right? So, like, my question for you is, like, are you aware of that correlation? What is that connection with like nerd culture and the military?
Yeah, it's funny because I had led a panel at a Comic-Con. This was pre-COVID, so it was the North Carolina Comic-Con up in Durham years ago, and I had led a panel on military and comics, and it was, there's a couple ways you could approach that. It's you could talk about comics in the military, or I'm sorry, the military in comics, like storylines about, I don't know, Sergeant
Rock, yeah.
Exactly. Yep. So you could do stuff like that, or you could talk about a connection between the two. And so we kind of made it a little bit more of that. One thing when we go back to like when we look at, let's say, newsreels from World War II, these are people who are seeing adventures of people going off and having far off adventures, serving something that's bigger than themselves, a cause that's bigger than themselves. And so, number one, there's kind of a corollary along with that. Like, we recognize, even if whether you like the military or don't, when you're in it, you do have this common sense that I am part of something bigger than myself. Regardless of the administration, I am an element of the national
pride behind it.
That's right. That's right. I am a part of something that's bigger than myself. That's part of the, a national instrument of power that has, at your nation's disposal. And there's pride and there's history. So no, serving something bigger than yourself, that's one thing that correlates. And then when we read these stories, it's, people who have these powers to serve a cause bigger than themselves. I think that's part of it. And then outside of the correlation between, a story and service is the escapism aspect of just having something that is, different. Yeah. And, again, go back to World War II. This was one of the most common forms of entertainment. It's cheap, it's disposable, at the time. Of course, it was less of a collectible and so on. And then the last thing is there is still a brotherhood in geekdom. Right. So we have multiple brotherhoods. I also know of people who are big into, big musicians who are in the military, and they have their own little subcultures, or I don't know, there's other sub communities, of people that have a common interest where they're wearing the uniform, but then they have a second interest that draws them with other service members.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's the camaraderie of it, right? Like it's a shared interest fellowship, right? That's the thing that you're often taught. And, the misery breeds company in the military for sure. But a lot of times comics, nerd culture, these are very niche interests that generally very few people have. I think that's why, again, the Oblivion Bar works so well, is because we are speaking to an audience of folks who love these things as much as we do.
That's right.
Yeah. And I've been a power fantasy, I think, is obviously the other correlation, right? Like in the military, we're often at the whim of someone else, right? We are told to go here, do the right thing at the right time in the right uniform, and don't ask questions. Whereas when I read a comic, if I'm reading The Punisher, or if I'm reading Superman, I am living that fantasy through their eyes, whether it be, again, the darker of Frank's view or a hopeful better tomorrow through Clark's,
Yeah. And, going back to the escapist aspect to it, for me, I disappear so fully into comics that, and my wife, she can attest to this. If she comes up, I can even see her in my peripheral vision coming up. And then if she says my name and it breaks the contact, then I will physically jump because it is so dislodges me from my head is literally inhabiting the story that I'm consuming. Yeah. And it's that immersive for me. Like, I don't casually read or anything. Sure. But especially comics.
Yeah, I can't either. You're so right. When I'm reading a comic, I have to lock in for those 22 to 48 pages, because I have to live it, because it's not, you're not just reading words and looking at pictures. You are, at least what I'm trying to do generally, and I'm not trying to like put my pinky out and say like I'm some kind of highbrow comic reader, but I'm trying to sort of interpret what the two creatives or multiple creatives, letterer, colorist, inker, everybody, regular artist, writer. I'm trying to interpret what they're trying to tell me, right? Because they're telling me something with the story, but they're also telling me something with their words. Like there's two different stories happening at the same time. Like Watchmen isn't about old retired superheroes and a big blue guy, right? It's a comic about comics. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's right.
Like
exactly.
That's like the two things, and I can't do that while The Office is in the background. You know what I mean? Like I have to lock in and know what I'm reading.
Yeah, I have a kind of now less of a morning fitness regimen, and it's more of a morning reading and kind of mental regimen. That's how I start my day now. And I don't read like one book straight through. Because it's almost like channel surfing. I'll read a little bit from a whole bunch of books, and then it ends with a couple of comics every day. And I've discovered that because it's so quiet, I'm still getting up, pretty early, and it's so quiet, I can so fully dive into it. During the day, especially, I have twin boys, who are fairly young, and so when I hear them, it is harder for me to like disappear into the story. So I crave every morning, this quiet, undisturbed reading time.
Okay. Sorry. One final last military question that also is comics as well. But
yeah,
it got me thinking, again, talking about Aaron and I and sort of that bond that was created in the military and then has since blossomed into something much bigger. Do you have someone from your time through your 30 years in the military and you talk to them today, someone says like a new trailer breaks or you're reading a comic you really love. Is there someone that you go to that you're like, whoa, you check this out. Like, this is incredible. What do you think? Kind of thing.
It's actually, so I have a number of people that I've been close to from multiple, assignments. And the ones on that side, kind of in the geekdom side, was a little bit later in my career. And it was one of my overseas assignments. And I was working at a U.S. embassy in Jordan, in the country of Jordan. And he was a big sci-fi reader. But he also did comics, just not as deeply. But we are constantly feeding each other with, hey, I just read this, or I just watched this. Like, you got to check this out. Mm-hmm. So I've got a couple of, different people. He's probably the one that I'm the closest, bonded with on sharing this stuff.
Sure.
So 100%.
Yeah. And you love that. That's the kind of, again, it's the camaraderie part about it. Like, I was someone who I played football in high school, and then I went straight into the military. And then I became a bartender, and I was a bartender up until 2 years ago. So like three industries or three like clubs, if you want to call it that, of where camaraderie is so crucial to the overall success of all of those industries. Right. Yeah. And they're three very different industries: sport, military, and then like just a normal restaurant job. But like the camaraderie part of it it's kind of, they've all made me into who I am today in very particular ways, but this is not about me. This is about you, Matt. And I want to talk to you about the reason why you're actually here. Military, comics, all these things. We'll continue on little bits here and there, but I really want to talk to you about ClosetWorld, which, this was a recent, or I wouldn't say it's recently developed. It was recently, or how should I phrase this? It was developed as a prose novel originally, right? With your brother, Richard.
That's right.
And then it has been recently developed into a comic. So I would love to just sort of pass the buck. This is a big question, but talk a little bit about that development originally with you and your older brother, and then, now transitioning it over into a comic. Yeah.
So I'll try to not take too long on it, but it is a long journey.
Be as long-winded as you please. I want all of the details.
Well, it's a long journey, but it can be summarized. He was at the time a single parent. He had 2 kids that he was taking care of. Life had really dealt him some hard blows, and he was similar. He loved comics, loved science fiction, loved to write, and he would write a lot of fan fiction, anime and manga. We would go to anime conventions and stuff like that, and but as a single dad, and then eventually it's a long story, but, he was in some big financial difficulties. He was able to start getting some, a couple of different jobs. I think at one point he had 3 jobs plus his 2 kids. Wow. And I knew he didn't have time to write. I knew when I didn't have time to write, there's a piece of me that was missing, and I would feel myself just slowly sinking into the mud, like you couldn't fully be yourself. So I came up with an idea I wrote this opening scene for this story called ClosetWorld, and it ends on a cliffhanger. And then and it was prose. I gave it to him and I said, okay, here's our rules. Number 1, you own the next scene, and you can write as much or as little as you want. It can be a paragraph, or it can be 10 pages or whatever. And then number 2, there is no time limit. If you have it ready by tomorrow, great. If it takes you a month, great. So because you didn't know what you were going to get, you couldn't actually begin to forecast what you were going to write. So it's an exercise in pure creativity. And the normal like restrictions of, it's got to be this long and it's got to be, it's got to be this soon. All that's off. So he really, had the opportunity to just live in a creative space. So we went back and forth. Oh, and then the other loose rule was don't, let's not like, let's respect the story.
Sure.
Like don't let me
the world whenever you have control.
That's right. Like I'll introduce a character. Don't just shoot him in the next scene and then, see what I did to them, So it was a tennis style story. I'd pitch it to him, then he'd pitch it to me and back and forth. Only recently did I recognize how, after we completed it, we decided at a certain point, we're converging on kind of where we think a natural ending is coming. Let's give it 6 more rounds, 3 each. And then we decided he would be the last one to finish it up. And then we did. And then 2 months after that is when he passed away. He took his own life. And, obviously we were not expecting, this. And so it was a huge, huge blow. I was not writing comics at this point. I was still an avid reader and collector, and I was heavily writing prose. I had written a couple of novels at this point that I'd shopped around, trying to find a home. I had a decent agent for the second one. I couldn't land a publishing deal. So I finally just put them out. And then eventually I started, breaking into comics. This is while I was still in the military. And at a certain point, I decided, I want to start putting together an independent pitch. What of the prose pieces do I have could I do as a comic? And I realized this one is so lends itself to a visual story. And I decided, number one, I want to transform this into a graphic novel. And then number two, his kids are getting older. And so they don't know ClosetWorld. So this was going to be my chance to offer them an insight into their dad and his imagination. I had an unbelievable artist from the Philippines named John Amor. I can't feed John's family. And so John and we took a long, long, long time to complete this because I was dedicated to him being the sole, artistic vision. He paired up with the writer Justin Jordan and did a long running webtoon series called Urban Animal, which I applaud. It's like this was a way he could take care of his family and then slowly chip away. So we spent many, many years until we finally completed it. I had decided I would not kickstart this until it was done. I did not want to ask people to help the development of it, but simply the production of it. So the printing costs, shipping it to me, and then, getting it out to backers. And then of course, we were fortunate enough that it was a success. It almost hit, double our goal. This was my first Kickstarter. And then now I'm excited. But the true success, honestly, is when I get to hand it to, his children who have since each married and had children of their own who do not know their grandfather, my brother. And I'll be able to hand it to the grandchildren that he never met. So that's the story. And I actually got through it without choking up because I'll be honest, as I got through the Kickstarter, I told my family, I said, I've been living it a lot, reliving his loss. And as I've been going through the Kickstarter and sharing the story and, a variety of different outlets, talking to people, trying to get awareness of this and, contribute to the Kickstarter. It's been an emotionally difficult time because it's been many years since he passed away. But to live it so close again, it really has kind of kept that door open to emotion. And it's not always been easy to put the emotions back in the box.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Wow. I mean, a lot to unpack there, Matt. And first, I appreciate you being completely transparent about all that. I'm very sorry to hear about, your brother and all of that. But it sounds like you are immortalizing him in one of the best ways possible, right? Like you're making this thing that you both were creating and bringing it to life. And like you said, John, his work on this, regardless of how long it took is great. He's an Eisner nominated artist for a reason. And I admire the fact that you were able to just be patient with him and able for him to be able to like work on Urban Animal at the same time as this. And one of my first questions through all of that was, how did you end up getting in contact with John? Like, how did that relationship start?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't remember if it was the digital webbing site back in the day where there was the right, it might have been that where he was posting on, the artist forum. I honestly don't know if digital webbing is still in existence or used as a mean for people to, find, artists, colors, and so on. But I think it was through there, and then reached out to him, and then, worked out a page rate and so on, and went forward from there. The hard thing was this story, which is kind of I'll just say it's in the vein of Chronicles of Narnia. It's an all ages kind of an adventure, somebody from the real world who's transported through a closet door into, a whole series of times and adventures and, talking animals and things like that. Kind of think, a little bit of Bone, a little bit of
That's what I was getting.
of Chronicles of Narnia.
Yep.
Exactly. So you need the right artist for that. And there's a whole stable of artists that are not the right artists for this.
Sure.
The tone, and John was such a unique, singular, look and feel. That's another reason I needed to finish this out with him. There was no one who was going to be able to give it the same look, even if you tried to match it. So
sure. Yeah. It's that's one of those things. And I get it. Like comics, it's tough to keep the band together a lot of times with the amount of money that's being put into it and the time constraint and schedules. But gosh, does it really throw me off sometimes, especially in like the ongoing big two aspect of it all, where it'll be one creator for 6 issues and it's another creator for 6 issues. And if it's like a different arc and there's a different story being told, sometimes that's fine. But I usually will like get used to a certain look to a book when I'm reading it. I think an example that comes to mind immediately is like Kelly Thompson's Birds of Prey run currently going on. And you've got Leo Romero on art. And there have been times here and there, and Leo is a master. There are times here and there where Leo just can't keep up with that once a month big 2 drop. And I get that, right? But it does feel a little disheartening when I pick up that latest issue and it's not Leo's work, Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. There were times where we had long stretches that, John would need to be working on other stuff. But, when I would get that next page, it was always so worth it. Because it's like, there's that familiarity, that heartwarming. It's like, there it is. That's exactly what the next page should be. And there's just no one who is going to make it look like that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I don't want to get like super spoilery at all. Like I want folks to be able to read this on their own, and we'll talk about how people can get access to it here in just a bit. But I want to ask you, there's sort of I feel like there's like a deeper conversation happening with this story in terms of like Johnny and his quest, right? Like throughout the story, he has this sort of Bone-esque Chronicles of, like you said, Chronicles of Narnia-esque type of escapade. And it seems like his ultimate goal through all of this, through all of the craziness that he's gone through, is to just get home, right?
Right.
And I'm curious, like at the end of this story, and again, without details, at the end, he really just wants to get home. And I'm curious, and you don't have to like spell it out for me if you don't want, but what's the deeper meaning there, if you can indulge?
The deeper meaning, it's actually about the device that he gets, the rig, the rig. Yes. The reality input generator. So once he gets that device, and then, there's a horde of demons trying to chase him down, and then there's angels trying to get the device back. And really, it's a little bit of a morality tale to ask the question, if you could have everything you ever wanted, is it really what you want? And he's confronted with that. And so, you think you do. You think if I truly could have everything that I want, you find it's not all it's cracked up to be. And so that was the kind of the question we were trying to answer, but still making it an episodic adventure that was, fun, that anybody could read, that his kids at the time could read this. So that was really the theme, just told through this tale of his adventure away from home, which, like you said, it's also a journey, away and all the fun that goes with that. But you never lose sight of your home, and then it pulls you back. I'll give you one quick aside. I had grown up in Kentucky, as I mentioned, and, it was a fairly small town upbringing. And then I had a whole series of military assignments out west. So I was stationed in Colorado Springs and in Las Vegas and Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Monterey, California. And I think there might've been one more in there. And, I was convinced after I'd gone out west, this is it. I'm never going back to the east. Just the
true
epic
Midwestern leaving, going, you know what? There's way better out here.
I'm like, there's everything. There's mountains and there's, incredible views. And yet I think as I got older, it's like I miss home. And then, of course, when I had, my twins, as we talked about where are we going to settle for retirement, we ultimately settled here in North Carolina. And it was this kind of pull back to our home and our, not necessarily in the exact state, but the environment that we grew up in, and decided this is where we want to raise, our boys. And so Johnny kind of experiences a little bit of that. You go out and you do this big adventure through a lot of different locations and times, and, have fun adventures, but there's something pulling you back.
Sure. Gosh,
Yeah.
you're speaking directly to me. I've left home 3 times. I've lived in Missouri, Oklahoma, Georgia, and somehow I'm in Indiana. So I was, I don't know where you were at exactly, Kentucky, but I'm just in Indianapolis. So we weren't far from each other to begin with, but somehow, and I'm not even like, I don't love Indiana, I've ended up back here because it's comfortable. I know my way, family's here. That's really important. I know my way around the city and the state, to a certain extent, but it's just like, there's something to be said. And I'm curious, what I found, especially this most recent time that I've come back, is that when you leave home, it's never really home again. Do you feel the same way in a certain aspect? Or you're like, no, I'm comfortable here. This is why I want to be back.
I do feel that, and that's actually why we didn't move back to where I grew up in Kentucky, because it has so grown dramatically. So again, I mentioned David Max from Northern Kentucky. He went to Northern Kentucky University, and and that's where I grew up. But it was across the Ohio River from Cincinnati. So Cincinnati's already maxed out. So it's only going to grow south or further north into Ohio. But a lot of that is already kind of marked out. And so a lot of people were moving further south into Kentucky. And when I do go back there, it's nothing like, what I had. And that's what actually drove us a little bit to here in North Carolina. Number one, it was my next to last assignment. I did one more away from my family while they were still here, one last year. And was able to rejoin them when I retired. But this is more reminiscent of the upbringing I had. A smaller town, great place to have some outdoor adventures, but not so far away removed from towns that you can't have like a life and movie theaters and stuff like that. But one other quick thing, and that is the home aspect of comics. Having grown up with a local comic shop, in the early days of the direct market, in the early days of shops, there is a piece, and it's any comic book store you go into, that feels like a piece of home. Whenever I go in, and I see the titles on the racks, you feel kind of like you're home, right? It's so familiar. And then just the environment in a shop is so familiar that you're just like, I'm home, Yeah. It's a great feel.
I think I come at this with a little more arrogance, which is annoying for me personally, because are you familiar with Parks and Rec? Do you like the show Parks and Recreation?
You know what? I never really watched the show. I know. Okay. I'm a big Office guy. Yeah.
It's totally fine. Honestly, I recommend it. But also there's a scene where one of the characters walks into Home Depot and he's sort of a manly man, libertarian, sort of build salt of the earth, build everything himself kind of guy.
Yeah.
And he goes to Home Depot and this guy comes up to him and he's like, "Can I help you with anything, sir?" And the character, he's like, "I know more than you," and just keeps going along. That's me at a comic shop when someone's like, "Hey, how can I help you?" I'm like,
right.
I promise you, I don't need help. I have,
that's right.
I'm here to look, or I've got a very particular thing that I'm looking for.
Right.
And I say that internally. I would never ever say that out loud, but like in my head, I'm like, I promise you, I don't need like a recommendation or anything, But to get back to Closet World, I just want to ask you, and I need to be upfront with you and the listener here, and I come with this with all the respect in the world. I'm not very religious. And I got to ask you, as someone who, reading the story and I enjoyed it, there are, and again, I hope this isn't spoilers, but like there are definite biblical foundation pieces here in this story. And I'm curious, like, was this a calculated, creative decision, or did you just sort of pull from what you know and love?
I think we just pulled from our faith backgrounds. We grew up in the faith, and of course, everybody at a certain point, especially when you leave home, you begin to, explore the world and figure out what you believe versus what you're raised to believe. And that's a journey in itself, and that was a journey for me. But I was ultimately kind of pulled back to a faith and a foundation that I'd had, but then I built on that. In fact, you asked about that. Do you have somebody from the military that you're really close to? we are kind of the opposite ends of the spectrum from a faith perspective, but because his is so well informed and mine is so well informed, we have these incredible discussions with such mutual respect for each other because our positions are so well informed and explored and so on. So when we wrote this, it was just an adventure. It really was. There was no plan. You know, that the first scene and chapter has no element of faith or anything. And then I think if I remember right, he introduced the rig, the reality input generator. And so we're like, okay, that's the device. They're trying to get him. They're trying to get Johnny and get this device back. And I think it's just kind of came out as we built the story from our respective faith backgrounds. Without, again, it's like Chronicles of Narnia. You know, C.S. Lewis is a renowned, Christian apologist. By that, I mean, apologetics means like a defense of something.
Right.
So he's got some of the most historic books, ever written, Mere Christianity and, several others. But he's also a great, just a writer of tales for everybody, morality tales, whatever. Narnia is certainly one.
Dune and Frank Herbert, absolutely. Another sort of allegory on religion, not necessarily Christianity, or I guess there are elements. The Muad'Dib is sort of like a Christ-like, figure, right?
Exactly. And then C.S. Lewis wrote the Space Trilogy, which people are a little bit less familiar with. Tolkien, of course, Lord of the Rings. He's got, they were contemporaries and friends. So
Kirby, even the new guys, Kirby, like that's all very religious based in some way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. So we did not intend to write a Christian or a faith-based story, but it just has, this element of demons trying to chase him and angels trying to chase him. And so, yeah, that's where that came from.
Sure. Yeah. And like I said, as someone who, I can read a story and not, have to completely align with whatever the story is telling me in order to enjoy it. And I'm not even saying that's how I approached it. I'm just saying like, I can read a book that I find revolting and still find value in it. And I feel like this story again it's not beating you over the head with, this is what you should believe. And this no, of course not. That's not, I hope everyone that's listening right now, that's not what you're gathering from this. I just found it very interesting that that's where you went with the story, because it goes from like a reality bending, closet transporting story. And then it's like, I think it's like page 6 or 7, it says heaven. I'm like, whoa, where,
right.
How do we get here in heaven? What happened?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I think he's the one who, if I remember right, I think Richard created the character, that particular character, that particular angel whose job is to manage all the constants, the mathematical constants in the universe. So he's like low end of the totem pole, but his device is the one that disappears, and he realizes, I'm going to lose control of the universe if this gets in the wrong hands. Sure. So yeah.
Okay. And as I was looking through a lot of your other work, again, we talked about An Army of Hope, Requiem for a Robot. These are all being published through Hangar 19. And
That's right.
Doing a little research here, you've got even an LLC, but the Hangar, it's the, what was it? The Hangar 19 Studios is essentially what a lot of this is being published through. And I'd just love to get sort of your thoughts, explain a little bit about like Hangar 19 and the creation of that and sort of the plans of that studio eventually.
Yes. So after I retired, I formed 2 companies. We realized we probably should have been a little bit more creative and not have the names so similar. So I have Hangar 19, which is a consulting business I do. I teach communication courses to military clients, and I teach a Middle East course. That was a big part of my career, was being a Middle East specialist and living in the Middle East almost a decade. Mm-hmm. So I teach small courses. That's all under my business, Hangar 19. Then I had a second business that I created, and that's Hangar 19 Studios. And that is all the creative side. We didn't want one business where it just doesn't make sense, right. Especially in Hangar 19 Studios. As an example, like with ClosetWorld, which, when it's on its way to the printer here in the next, day or two, post Kickstarter, it's on its way to the printer. Well, it's coming out from me, and that is my company, Hangar 19 Studios. So for this project, John Amore was part of this project, Tamara Bonville and February Ferdian on colors, and then Rob Jones on letters. So this is me going out and hiring teams that I've decided I'm putting it out under my banner, under my company, Hangar 19 Studios. So I have some stories that I will put out. And then I have other stories that, as an example, the longtime Marvel and DC artist, Khoi Pham, He's done Mighty Avengers with Brian Michael Bendis and a whole host of stories that he was the artist for. He and I have partnered up, and we do a lot of work together. We have a mentoring business. We do a webcomic that's online right now that we are just doing for free for fun. Called The Breach, a science fiction story, and a few other things. So he and I have a podcast actually now. We've got, So we've got maybe 5 or 6 episodes that we've released where we talk about life in comics, not the nuts and bolts of making them, but how do you achieve balance in your life, or how do you find time to focus, or how do you manage with trust with a creative team, things like that. It's called How to Comic with Yocum and Fahm, but it's really about how to do life in this. Well, I bring this up because Coy and I, we have pitches that we are putting together that we're sending off to other publishers. So not to put out via Hangar 19 Studios, but to send to a variety of different publishers to see, if it may or may not be interest there. But like I said, I have a series of creations, ClosetWorld being one of them, an Army of Hope, another one, Requiem for a Robot, all those two fitting in a sci-fi universe that I've kind of built out, that I decided I will release these myself. And so it's coming out. Those two are on Global Comics, the website. And then eventually I may or may not look to turn those into physical products, possibly through Kickstarter or maybe through other means.
Sure. Is there a sort of a wider distribution plan for ClosetWorld? Like, could someone go to their LCS and grab a copy if they wanted?
Because I'm publishing it myself under Hangar 19 Studios, what I did know is I knew if I'm going to try to get this into bookstores, I need I'm going to need a barcode and an ISBN number. So I've taken care of all of that. I may or may not sell it through Amazon. I'm still trying to decide that. I will go to the local shops that I can and see if I can leave X number of copies with them to sell. But I'm not really intending to try to find a way to get an account with Lunar or, Penguin Random House, or anybody else who might, pop up, like the potential sale of Diamond to Alliance Entertainment and stuff like that. So right now, I'm not going to go down that road to distribution to get it out into broader, comic shops around the country. But as a graphic novel, and that was one of the reasons, when I did this originally, I was looking at multiple issues and decided, no, let me collapse this all at once so I can get it through book distribution. And that gives me options. Whether it's through Amazon or, of course, I'm going to sell it on my own website to people, and then I can take it to cons and stuff like that.
Sure. Do you have an upcoming con that you're going to that people can look out for you?
Yes. Coy and I, Fan Expo just told us they would bring us out to Fan Expo Denver. So not for a little while. We'll be going to that. My nearest big one that I always go to is Heroes Con. In Charlotte.
It's a couple weeks from now, right?
That is I think that's in June. I think
you could be right there. I thought I saw it coming out here soon, but I'll look it up for us real quick.
Let's see.
You're right. It's June 20th.
Yeah, June 20th.
Yep.
And then in July, that's when I'll be at the first week. Actually, over the 4th of July, that's when I'll be in Denver at Fan Expo Denver.
Okay.
And then Baltimore. I always go to Baltimore, and that is. Yeah,
Matt, I want to go to Baltimore. That's one every year. I'm like, gosh, I need to go to Baltimore, and then I end up going to New York Comic Con. I'm like, I can't do both. Unless you live in that area, of course, you could totally do both. But being in the Midwest, I have to decide whether I want to go to New York Comic Con mid-October or Baltimore, usually the last week of October. So
I'll tell you, Baltimore is it's a comics lovers convention.
It's all everyone always tells me every year. They're like, "Are you going to Baltimore?" I'm like, I want to. Okay, make me not go to New York so I can go to Baltimore.
Yeah, and Heroes Con's the same way. They just, if you love comics, those are the conventions to be at.
I'm sort of jealous of you, everyone that's going to Heroes Con this year, because Michael Allred's going to be there this year, and that's someone I'd really love. We had him on the show a couple weeks ago, but I really want to meet him in person at some point. But everyone that is going to Heroes, definitely check. I think Michael, that's the only con he's doing all year. So,
nice.
Yeah.
I would like to meet him. As I learned about his past, I don't remember what he did, and I don't remember what year it was, but he worked at the Air Force Academy long ago. And I want to say it might have been the time.
Radio, was it? He did radio for the Air Force?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
he
right.
was a DJ of some sort. Yeah.
That's right.
the most interesting man in comics, everybody.
Right.
You probably didn't gather that from my conversation with him and Matt Fraction a couple weeks ago, but if you listen to him in any other interview, I could honestly just listen to him talk for an hour. If I said nothing, if I brought him onto the Oblivion Bar, put a mic in front of him and said nothing, I would be told, because he is just like fully he loves Star Wars. I don't know if you know this. I know you love Star Wars as well, but he creates like these like full like authentic suits from Star Wars, like from scratch, and like his original art collection is incredible. Anyway, this is not about Mike Allred. It's about you, Matt.
Yeah.
And I want to ask one last thing before we get out of here. It's sort of highlighted on your website. You've written again for Marvel back in the day. You've done a couple side stories, through Wolverine and Astonishing Tales. And was there an Avengers story in there as well, if I'm remembering correctly?
Yes, that was my first.
And you were even what was it? You did something with Jeff Johns. You were a technical advisor through Jeff Johns when he was on his Green Lantern run. Talk a little bit about that. I'm just curious, like what was that like, and how did you get in the door with Marvel at that time?
Sure. Yeah. So I was in the military at the time. I was stationed in Las Vegas. Went to my local comic shop. I had no idea that there was going to be a signing that day on that Wednesday. And, because I'm a Wednesday warrior. I'm always in, that day to pick up my, my stack.
One of us.
That's right. Absolutely. Always. And Jeff Johns is there and he's doing a signing. And so I somehow strike up a conversation with him where it comes out about I'm stationed here. I'm in the Air Force. He had just finished up the miniseries with Green Lantern and was getting ready to launch the ongoing with now the deceased Carlos Pacheco. And he had said, hey, Hal Jordan's Air Force. I would love to get the lingo right. Would you be willing to review the scripts and make sure that the lingo is correct? So I said, yeah, of course. I had written prose at that point for years. And of course, I had read and loved and collected, comics for years. And that was the light bulb that I'm like, why am I not trying to write comics? So after reviewing scripts, it really opened my eyes to the possibility. So I started looking at ways, how can I stand out or make a mark or be seen in a way that you can't if you're trying to break in. At the time, Joe Quesada was the editor-in-chief at Marvel. There was going to be an auction. This was in the Wizard World convention, the Wizard Con convention era. And so it was Wizard LA, the convention. The Hero Initiative, which is a charity to help, older creators who've fallen on hard times.
We're very, very aware of the Hero Initiative and their great work. Yeah.
So they are how I got my entry into comics.
No kidding.
I won an auction to have lunch with Joe. And it was at that convention. So I win the auction through the eBay auction. I go have lunch with him. At this time, I was writing reviews for a comics review site, and I was doing interviews. And I asked Joe if I could interview him. He said yes. And I said, look, I'm also a writer. I'd be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to ask, would you be willing to let me pitch you a couple stories? Of course, I'd already pre-built 3 stories. And I'd heard the triangle. Like I'd heard the triangle of, you need 2 of 3 things. You need big name creator, big character, big concept. You need 2 of those 3. Well, I'm no name. So it's like I need big character, big concept. And so all 3 of those were kind of with that. Don't pick a B, C, D list character. Pick an A list character. And so I pitched it. He liked one and then handed me off to an editor after he got back. And that was my first sold comic ever, was an Avengers story. And so, so it went from there.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the Wolverine babysitting story then, because I was unable to find a copy of Wolverine 900, but I need to know a little bit more about this, because it was like a part of an anthology. There's multiple stories in this Wolverine 900, and you're one of those stories.
That's right. Yeah. The nice thing was, in that case, I had done a 4-issue web comic series called Devolution that was a horror series with a different Filipino artist named Jake Bilbao, a black and white series. Did you ever see the movie Panic Room?
Oh, sure. David Fincher, of course. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So this was Panic Room with zombies. So,
okay. Sold. You got me.
Yeah. That's what Devolution is. It's it was 5 zombies trapped in a house with a married couple, an estranged married couple, and they're in 2 different rooms. And there you go.
Is Jared Leto in this one as well? Or
right. Yeah. I'm just kidding. He's a zombie. Yeah. So I had done this 4-issue series, and I was pitching Jake to Marvel, the artist I was pitching into Marvel. And then eventually they came to me and said, hey, we want to do a story with Jake. And since he's, you two have already worked together, how about you write the story? And, it's going to be a Wolverine story in an anthology. So that's when I started asking myself, well, what's the core thing in my mind? For Marvel, not for the independents, but for Marvel and DC, there's a core center point in the wheel that's the theme of that character. With great power must also come a great responsibility. And then you're dancing around the wheel of that center point, trying to tell that same theme in different ways, But it's a linear in independent comics. You can march forward and you can kill people, you can, whatever. You can go off script. But for Wolverine, I was trying to think, what is that center point beyond just, I'm the best there is at what I do, but what I do isn't very nice. And I thought, what's something else that's at the center? Well, one of them is he quite often gets paired with someone young, more of the.
Or
that's right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Rogue in the movies, I guess,
Yep. Jubilee, things
sure.
like that. Yeah. So I'm like, okay, let's do a flip of the words. I'm the best there is at what I do, but let's say I'm the worst there is at what I'm doing. What I'm doing is trying to be nice. So yeah. So I'm like that. I'm going to use that, and then I'm going to pair him up with somebody else. A little girl who's lost, and then see what is the story around that saying. And then that's when I came up with this story.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I am going to seek out issue 900 of Wolverine now because I want to read this. And I think I saw it came out digitally as well. Is that correct? It was a part of a digital run for Marvel at one point. So I got to get my hands on it at some point. If you have a digital version of that book, Matt, you're going to have to send it to me after the conversation.
Absolutely.
Because I want to read it. But we're sort of nearing the end of our conversation here. And I want to sort of end our great conversation that we've had thus far with sort of something that we often ask our guests, right? Which is basically, as nerds, we're always sort of looking for new content, or we're loving something very much. Like for me right now, the studio through Apple TV Plus is maybe my new favorite television series currently. But I want to ask you, like, what's something that you've been enjoying recently? Comic, movie, television, podcast, whatever.
Yeah, let me give two. One that was a little less. Like. Yeah. Okay. The recent ones that I'm loving, I've always loved when you go to panels and you see comics creators, the ones who actually can say, they're asked the question, what comics do you like right now? And I love the creators who can say, oh, I'm reading comics X or Y or Z, and it's so good. I love when I hear that. So, I read, I don't know, 1 to 3 a day of something. I mean, it's every day.
One of us. I'm going to keep saying one of us.
That's exactly right. So on the Marvel side, I do love the Ultimate, the Ultimate line, particularly Ultimate Spider-Man. I just read back-to-back the last 2 issues just the other day. And especially, I don't know, they're such an unbelievable pairing. It's nice to see Hickman do something that is both still grand, and by that I mean within the Ultimate line, it's a whole new expansion of a new universe and so on, but within an old one, and then with an artist, so it's an expansive, but it's also still grounded.
It does feel very intimate still, right? Like these conversations you're hearing between Harry and Peter and his family and Peter, I totally see what you're saying. Like it is Marvel's biggest character, maybe the biggest character in comics in a brand new mythos. And yet it still feels kind of small in a way.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then the episode, it was like the Christmas episode where they have like a house party. The end of that literally gave me chills in a way I have not had in a long time, where I just had to look at it and go, how did he do this?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I felt such unbelievable chills. That's on the Marvel side, that I really, really love. I do love the Absolute stuff that DC is putting out.
Yeah. I
loved Absolute Batman, but Absolute Wonder Woman has blown me away.
Yeah.
And I wasn't expecting that. And I didn't know what to expect. I didn't have high or low expectations. I was just kind of ready to receive it. And then it overwhelmed me. I'm like, this is truly next level storytelling. It's the same, big, but with a very like human scale to it. These private moments that she'll have, with different characters along the way. And it's, oh goodness. I love that. I love the human moments amid an epic scale. Like I've always been drawn to that.
Character-driven stories will win me over 10 times out of 10. Like you can tell a big funny story or a big crazy epic awesome cosmic altering story, and I'll generally find some entertainment in that, some interest. But character-driven stories, it's part of the reason why I love Tom King so much, because a lot of his stories are you're in the cerebellum of that character, whoever that character may be. So I totally agree. And Kelly Thompson continues to prove that she is just one of the best writers in comics, like just bar none, unquestionably. Again, I was speaking on it earlier about her Birds of Prey run, but yes, I totally agree. Absolute Wonder Woman. And again, if Aaron was here, he has this, like he has always said, he has this hard time latching onto Diana and her stories, even through George Perez and Greg Rucka and Brian Azzarello and all of these different books that are great, I think. But like he has a hard time latching, and somehow Kelly Thompson and Hayden Sherman have found out a way to connect Aaron to that story.
Yeah, same. So I've had the same exactly as him. I've had a hard time connecting to her for all the same runs. I've read all of them. And yet this, I'm so deeply connected, with her. So Kelly Thompson, complete, just knocking it out of the park in ways that I'm just blown away. The second thing, so that's kind of on the mainstream side, but the second one, and so it's not as immediate, but there's a number of podcasts I listen to. David Harper on Off Panel, Adam Freeman on Comic Industry Insiders, and I don't know. There's a couple more to come. The Publishers Weekly, with Heidi and team, and so on David Harper's, he had mentioned a manga series. Now, my brother Richard and I, we loved anime and manga before it was really what it is today. I mean, we were going to conventions and stuff like that. And so we've got, old DVDs and, a number of things that I inherited his collection, after he passed. And then I got away from it. I never got away from comics, but I did from anime and manga. And then, but David Harper had mentioned this series, Pluto. And I finally broke down and got the first volume. It's one of the most astounding comics I've read literally in my entire life. And there's a chapter in, I want to say it's the third chapter or the fourth chapter in volume 1. And, because it's short episodes that make up each volume. There's an overarching story, but, it's got short chapters. And in this one, and I'm not giving it away, but there's a blind musician. So it's Naoki Urasawa and Osamu Tezuka. So it's a reimagining of,
Astro Boy?
Of Astro Boy, thank you. Yeah, It's like a reimagined Astro Boy. But the third or fourth chapter, there's a character who's a blind musician. He did musical scores for like films and stuff like that. And then his interactions with this one robot. In that chapter, this is what I tell people. If this chapter does not break your heart, then you have no heart. It is so astounding. Yeah. The way they will think of beats to hold with no dialogue to generate emotion. And so it's both the execution of it, but then there's a personal connection for me. I'll try to not get emotional, but with my brother, we shared this. We shared a love of this when anime and manga were not super popular. So we were already in a minority community of geekdom in a time that long before that, and yet this was even a minority element within the world of geekdom. Those who actually appreciated and loved this.
100%.
And when I read this, it's like I can't share this with him, and it's so unbelievable. But I can share our story, which I know is not on this level. But it's something that came from his imagination, and now I get to hand it to his kids. Anyway, I'm sorry. I
do not be sorry. Honestly, Matt, I'm so grateful that you're willing to just even share, right? And be that vulnerable too, right? Like that is extremely admirable, and it's a rare thing that we get here on the show, because a lot of times we're doing a lot of dumb shit, and it's the Oblivion Bar is like Aaron and I's sandbox. We just sort of talk about all the dumb crap. So when we can have someone like you here who is promoting something that's very special and and so well done as well, that I think it's worth sticking around on that. Like there's no point in trying to avoid any of that. So I appreciate you doing that. And if I can very terribly transition, I would love to share. I'm sort of new into the manga verse myself. Like
Yes.
Aaron, again, if he was here, he would say he's been into it as long as you guys have, like you and your brother. He's an old school manga anime guy. And I have to show you. So sight unseen, I went to Barnes and Noble and I just looked at their incredible selection of manga. And I found this, which I've shared on the show.
Okay.
It's called Freerun Beyond Hero's Journey. Are you familiar with this?
I'm not. No.
I highly recommend it. It's incredible. It's basically about an elf girl who basically it joins a team of. It's like think of like a Final Fantasy RPG team, right?
Okay.
And she outlives everybody. And the story is about how she has to sort of reconcile with the fact that she doesn't connect with anyone because she already knows that she's going to outlive them, their kids' kids. And where we pick up with Freerun in her story, she's sort of coming to grips with that. She's lived hundreds of years before that. She will live hundreds of years afterwards. But it's where she starts to turn the corner and she starts to really connect with the people around her. And it's really special. And it's got a lot of great action. The art is incredible. I can't recommend it enough. And I'm so happy that of all of the manga in the world that I could have randomly selected off of the shelf. And I literally just picked it up because of the cover, because it looks like an RP, like a classic RPG Final Fantasy cover, right?
Yeah.
And it blew me away immediately. So highly recommend that one. And then I haven't read this, but you've probably heard of it. I picked it up sight unseen. I remember someone telling me somewhere that this was a good book, but we've got Gunsmith's Cat.
Yes.
You familiar with this series?
I am. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Again, sight unseen, but I was at my local comic book shop the other day and I saw it. I liked the cover art. I saw that Dark Horse was distributing it and I was like, enough, I will buy it. So those are my two unsolicited manga recommendations along with yours, Matt.
There's more material than we have time. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I'm
absolutely.
okay with that.
I've always said I have like over 1,700 comics, manga, all the things. I will never get through all of it. Like I've read probably about 85% of it. But if I wanted to go through and read it all again, I wouldn't. If I had nothing else to do in my life, it would take me years to try to do that. Right.
Well, if you truly use the word library, we were a family of librarians in my family. We all grew up working at the local library. But if you use the term like this is my library, think about your actual public library. You haven't read every book in the library.
Right.
It's just a large repository that you can select from. Yeah. So your personal library, we should treat it the same.
Yep.
It's a large repository that I always have material in there that I can select from.
Yeah. And I've heard that over 1,200 books is it's called a library. Anything over 1,200 in a collection is considered a library. So that's like a weird anecdote that I like to tell people like, I have a library because I have around 1,700 books. But Matt, gosh, what a pleasure it was having you here on the show today. Just so much, I thank you so much for sharing everything that you have, everything about ClosetWorld, just your career, both in the military and in comics, and just, it was great talking to you. And I'd love to get you back on at some point for whatever reason. Doesn't matter whether you have something to promote or not. But I'd love to sort of pass it off to you one last time before we let you go. How can the listeners follow you, both your career and just everything else that you have going on post this conversation?
Yes. So a couple ways. So I do have a personal website, mattyocum.com, and that's, mattyocum.com. That's where I keep, up to date on certain things. I did get the site ClosetWorldComic.com. And so eventually when I get the copies, I will be selling them. Now that the Kickstarter has ended, so people cannot get it through that. But once it's in my hand, I'll be selling those, through that site as well. I do have a section on the mattyocum.com. And then the How to Comic with Yocum and Pham, that's on the Yocum and Pham Substack. And, Koi Pham, he's a longtime artist that I'm partnered with on a host of different things. And that's spelled PHAM. So Yocum and Pham .substack.com. And that's where we put, our webcomic. We do announcements on upcoming conventions that we're doing. Anytime we go together, we have a panel called Overcoming Obstacles, just obstacles that you've had in life as you're trying to live the life as a creator. And then that's where we also post our actual podcast, which is called How to Comic with Yocum and Pham. And so we put links on there, and of course it's on Apple and, all that stuff. So that's how you can reach me.
Awesome. Well, again, Matt, thank you again. Next time that we get you on the show for whatever reason, I'm going to make Aaron be here because he has to meet you at some point. I'm going to make sure of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. If not here, then hopefully at a convention somewhere in person.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. Well, Matt, thank you. And we will talk to you next time that you're on the show.
Sounds good. Thanks, Chris.